All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Thomas Murphy. Thomas is a Blender3D expert and ambitious game developer, currently freelancing as a Blender artist and working on the Shadows Lengthen, an indie project using the Blender game engine. And he's also got a Patreon page that he updates monthly with new content, and you should definitely check it out and follow his journey. He's from New York in America. He's got a wife and daughter, two cats named Ham and Fish, and a dog named Daisy. And today we'll just be talking about his journey in game development. He's got a really interesting perspective on the industry, a really interesting angle that he's taking it, using an open source engine, creating an open source game. And I'm going to talk to him all about that. So thank you for joining me today, Tom.
Thank you.
It's cool. I've watched some of your talks, and I didn't know much about Blender before researching you. I knew of Blender, but I didn't actually know what it was used for kind of within the industry and things like that. And you really helped me learn about that. So I recommend anyone that's interested in learning more about Blender, look at Thomas Murphy's talks that he's done for Blender on YouTube. You can find them. But my question, because there's a lot that I want to talk to you about, but I think I want to just start with the the Blender game engine. Why? Okay. I need to kind of take a step back so that other people have context. What is the Shadows Lengthen? Why are you developing it on the Blender game engine?
Okay, that's a fair question. And to be fair, I'm also I've answered it a lot because I like answering it. This came up in my second Blender talk at Blender conference in 2019. And yeah, Blender's a wonderful tool, and a lot of people should definitely be using it. But it has discontinued the use of the Blender game engine. So they actually removed support for it. And they actually have a very good justification for that. It was difficult to maintain, and user adoption wasn't really very high. But one of the things I did at Marvel was I would do software investigations, and I would look to see if a tool was viable or not. And Blender was one of those things I worked on. The reason I'm making a game now, after they've removed support for it, is because there's nothing else like it. And that sounds like an unfair statement because there's a lot of open source game engines. There's there's Godot, which is I think the easiest answer that most people would say, or Godot. I always say it wrong. But the problem is that these all support a specific ecosystem, and that is locking down of content. So suppose you're an indie game developer, you want to make a game. You're making a game now, or whatever, an application. This requires a lot of assets, specifically 3D assets, if you're going to make a 3D game. And you got to buy them from all these different marketplaces. And in the fine print for all these online asset stores, it always says you can't redistribute this asset, which essentially means we don't want you giving it away for free. We want you to buy it, and we want the next person to buy it. And I understand that. But the problem is that all the game engines that are kind of out now, they support this. Sometimes not directly, but inadvertently, because you're going to lock down your content, you're going to lock down your code, and you're kind of channeling everything in a specific direction in the game industry, which I think is kind of a cause for a lot of the rot that happens. Like it's pretty toxic in the game industry, and I've been a part of so many projects that have just been destroyed because of this of the dynamic of locking down your content and how do we limit people's access to this. And Blender, more than any other game engine, has a unified workflow, which means the working files for the game are also the 3D files that you can open. And there's no sort of microtransaction. You can open it. You'll be able, if you dare to try, and you'll be able to change the color of something, or you'll be able to see how things work. And almost no one is doing this because there's no real good financial justification for doing it, because you can't lock down the content. You can't be part of the whole commerce thing. And I'm trying to be the release valve for that. I'm trying to be the person that's like, hey, look, a game can be open and you can still kind of do it. And maybe it's not to get you addicted. It's not to get you addicted to the gameplay loop. It's not like a casino. It's more like a board game that you might pull out once in a while and play just once a year maybe. And I feel like we've kind of lost, the game industry has lost its way, and it's become a casino where you get locked in. They try and keep you in there, and then grinding or playing, and it usually takes advantage of the emotionally vulnerable or children, and it's pretty bad. And that's why I'm doing this. I felt very, I was so positive that the Blender game engine would be successful, and I thought, oh, thank God that's out there. That's going to solve the gaming industry. But then no one ever really adopted it. So then when they said they were going to remove it, I was like, it's up. I'll be the only one then, because I felt so it was so important that I had to do it, and so here I am doing it.
I love that. That's
That's
such a powerful mission, and I feel the passion coming through your words as you're saying it, and I can't help but just jump on board, and just kind of and I want to roll with this because I think you have a really interesting perspective, and you're in such a unique position because you've committed so much time using the Blender game engine. You know it inside out by now, I'm sure. So
yeah.
I need to ask a few more questions. So the Shadows Lengthen is a horror game where you can kind of interact and overcome other antagonists, so vampires, werewolves, and you're kind of gonna iteratively update with new creatures and things like that. What I'm trying to understand more what the kind of I liked your analogy of a casino and a board game, and I'm trying to understand what you expect a player to, how would they play the game in terms of it being open. So I'm trying to understand this whole mentality of an open game that doesn't really exist at this stage. So could you walk me through like a few different cases of someone playing your game and what that experience is like?
So there's a point of distinction. There's an open world, and then there's an open game. So the open source game is you'll be able to see the code, see how it works, change things. And then the open world is it's never ending. So the game is essentially a horror monster simulator, which is if you ever went out into the world and stayed in a cabin in the woods, what would it be like if you met the monster? So vampire, werewolf. I'm choosing these characters because they're popular in the public domain and they're in the zeitgeist. People understand what they are. So I come from the branding world, and you understand that if there's a popular character that people recognize, you can make content around that, and it brings people's attentions to it. Attention. So what I'm trying to do is bring attention to the Blender game engine and show that it's okay to be used still, even though it's been discarded. It's actually I think in the small part due to my efforts. The Up Blender game engine, which is a fork of Blender, is now supported once more, and that actually includes all the new tools. So I've actually switched to the Up Blender game engine, which is the same thing basically, but a fork of Blender. And it solves a lot of the problems, and the devs are really good about supporting it, and they've actually come to support the project directly. But to answer your question, it's basically a horror monster experience simulator, and as often as I'm able, I'm not really quite sure, I would update with a new monster, kind of like a monster of the week, and add that to it. And so in that instance, I would probably add it as a microtransaction where you would add the monster and you could play with it. But you could also add your own monster, or you could have just the one monster and you could keep modifying that monster and make multiples yourself. There's no limit to what you could do with the art files. So there would be no paywall or anything like that. It's just you get access to the files and you can have fun with them, or you could allow me to keep having the honor of creating a new monster and you could get that new one. That's the idea.
Do you think that there's anything else on the market? Like Minecraft kind of comes to mind in terms of like the people that create servers with different kind of game modes and things. Would you associate it kind of like that in terms of it's kind of like a games platform in a way? Would you kind of relate it to something?
That's fair. Yeah, I don't think my game is totally unique. I mean, there's lots of games out there that allow modding and stuff like that, so you can mod your own game. What comes down to is that you need a different software. There's no unified workflow. You can't open it in directly in a 3D editor, modify things. There's usually some sort of there's a level of opacity between game creator and game. So like, sure, you can if you're in Minecraft, you're going to have to modify stuff, and you're going to need to use a different 3D program. I don't know if they have an in-game editor at this point. I know that that's something that a lot of, like, I think Roblox has that, where you can edit things in game world. But what makes Blender unique is it's a very powerful design suite. It's a full design suite. It's not just game editing. It's 3D modeling, sculpting, animation. You can even do video editing in it, or you can use programming. You could actually use text. And I think the new add-on came out this week that people are using it as spreadsheets too. So it's a very versatile tool, and it works really great. And there's no, it's very clear. It's extremely clear what it does. And I don't know of any other game that exists where you would be able to download the files, open them up, and not just make a modified level. Like, I think there's Quake, you can make quad, you can make like old school, you can recreate your own levels, and you can make new levels in Skyrim or whatever, but you can't really get at the core game code and just control everything in a unified workflow. You'd have to use Maya and some other sort of coding environment, and then you'd have to publish it using their internal tools. So I guess that's what sets my game apart, though it's mostly, it's not doing anything entirely new. Like, the game's tricks are just game tricks, you know?
Yeah. Would you, so I work in production in the gaming industry. I don't have programming experience. I'm learning like the basics, but would you expect someone like me to be able to go in and change asset files? Like, are you just wanting people to play around with the art assets, or are you actually wanting people to implement new game mechanics and new gameplay loops within the game? I suppose it's all exposed, right?
Yeah, I guess I'd be thrilled if people did that. If people like started making better code than my code, I'd be thrilled, because my code is actually garbage. And also, like, a lot of the code that I have is actually community supported. So there's people out in the community that have actually taken, like, every artist that's worked on the game, it's not just me. I've hired people, and I always pay them above market to work on the game. I don't accept free work from people. And Tim Krellin actually is a very familiar with the API of Blender. So at the start of this, he actually did a lot of the code for me, and I've learned a lot from him. And I talked about him in my talk. But a lot, even Ton Rosendahl, who's the creator, and I guess he's the kind of the head of the Blender Foundation at the moment. I guess it's more of a co-owned thing, but he's supported me by allowing me to do this. I mean, he lets me go up and give a talk about this thing. And it's kind of a testament to, like, the community of Blender, that I'm still permitted to get away with this, even though it's not technically supported. He and many people, including my patrons, have supported this, and it's very difficult for me to justify it, especially when there's so many competing things out there. But they're all, the reason that everyone gets into these things is based on fear. You're afraid that if you do this, or you don't learn coding, or you don't use this engine that we're promising will be the engine of the future, you're going to be left out. You're going to not get to do the thing you love to do or want to do. And so that fear keeps people channeled into these offerings like Unity and Unreal. And I mean, like, they're commercial companies. They want a return on investment, but you can actually be nuts, and you could go off and you could use Blender. It's fine. You could use the Blender game engine. It works. But people are afraid they won't be validated. They won't get a job out of it. You know, you won't make money off of it. And I think maybe the world needs to accept that the game industry, to a certain extent, it shouldn't be as lucrative as it is. And if you have to resort to exploiting children and the emotionally vulnerable in order to make money, you know, they call it like finding whales in like mobile games. Like, if this is what you need to do, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. That's basically what I see it as.
Yeah,
It's not really an indictment of the game industry. It's more of we've made a market, and we've gone maybe a little too far.
I love it. I feel like you're taking the angle of using games as an art form to be creative, and kind of comparing it to a canvas, you know, and or writing a book, and that's what I love, and it's exactly the kind of people that I want to talk to on Zero to Play, because it's bringing gaming back to I guess where the next phase should be in terms of the medium and how it develops is people really taking risks and and trying new things. And I think I think it's understated how many challenges you have faced trying to develop this in Blender, that you kind of use them as creative challenges. In your talks, you talk about how that you because of the way Blender works, you can only have so many lights on in the scene, and that kind of pushed you in a direction of creating this horror game because of the atmosphere that it created. And I love that, because that's the whole discussion about creativity, is kind of using your constraints around you to build something.
Yeah.
Would you associate what you're doing as kind of an art form in a way? Like, have you been creative in other ways in terms of like painting or drawing, or and do you kind of feel that same way when it comes to developing your game?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And I feel like, and you're right, more people need to be doing this. Gaming is making a lot of money in the world right now. And I think gaming, because of the nature of games and how they're action-based, they can impact so many different industries, and gamification of tools and things, I think, is going to continue to grow. But I think there is a segment of games that need to be pushing deeper into the human condition, and trying to figure out what what games we can create that can really make us grow as a society and push us forward as humans. Do you have any games that you associate, that you kind of speak on, that you think do a great job of this, of kind of being represented as a piece of art?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, making a game, I don't get a lot of time to play games. I'm actually really kind of I'm kind of at a loss there. I do know that a lot of my patrons, I'm on Discord with them, and Quake has. I've learned now that Quake is there's so many people that are still passionate about it, then they use it still, and they're making mods with it, and they're just creating with it, and there's no actual promise of some sort of commercial payout or anything like that. They're doing it because they love it, and I think that's a fair that's a fair. I guess I'd say Quake is a good example then, because it has inspired a community of people to work together. One of my patrons was just mailed one of those 380 video cards, because he was showing his maps on a server, and he expressed interest, and he was doing it. Now he's working on this mod in the pandemic, and there's no big paycheck involved. It's just that they really want to do it, and I guess that's what it is, really. Yeah, it's like an art form. I do know for sure that if the commercial part keeps going, it's going to destroy whatever gaming is. It's going to make it worse. It's not going to like fix it. So yeah, I think it's an art form. And also, I did go to art school, and my first job, actually, I taught myself programming, and I taught myself 3D. My first technical job was doing portraits in Central Park. So I just took a pencil and paper and started drawing portraits. And then I got a job at Marvel after that. And then I taught myself Blender, and then I taught myself programming. So if you haven't learned programming yet, and you feel like it's some sort of arcane language that you're getting there and it's hard, it's sort of not that hard. But I think that a lot of times it's unclear. I think that like everyone could learn programming if they understood that, whoa, it's not as hard as it seems.
Mm-hmm.
It seems more complicated than it really is. And there's a lot of wonderful tools out there that actually are making it much more accessible and easy to learn code than ever before. There's like 5 mobile apps that do it, and I go on those when I Google stuff. You can just Google things, and if you don't know the answer, it's like right there. So
totally. And I think you have proven that, like, going from a creative background and then going into programming, learning programming, I think that shows that if you have that kind of drive and that reason to learn, like you probably saw the Blender game engine, you saw the opportunity there, and that kind of led you to start asking questions and Googling answers and looking at tutorials. And I think having that game that you're trying to develop in the background is what motivated you to learn. It's not about just sitting down and going, oh, being a game developer would be a very financially good decision for me to do. I'm going to learn programming. I feel like there does need to be some motivation. I feel like you found that. Is that correct? When you started learning programming, did you have a project that you wanted to do that led you to learn it?
Yeah, actually, usually, there's actually a saying. I'm not sure if this is a saying, but I've heard it said a lot that an artist that turns into a programmer was an animator at one point. So animators, a lot of what they do is extremely iterative, and after you've animated your thousandth walk cycle, you naturally become almost kind of like disillusioned, and you think there must be a better way to do this, and of course there is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of 3D animators organically start looking for ways to program this thing they've done 1,000 times by hand. And I mean, you could say the same thing about 3D. I mean, from a very visual perspective, if I kept drawing this picture from multiple angles, I could use a 3D rendering program and achieve this much faster. Mm-hmm. So I think that like I think most artists, they're naturally inclined towards programming. Believe it or not, I think that that's a natural course of action. If you do it long enough and enough, you will eventually find your way towards automating your process. And a lot of artists just do this by default. Maybe they don't go directly to programming. Maybe they have some sort of elaborate tracing setup, or they have the little wooden figurines that you can pose so you can do life sculpture. And so I think that's a natural thing to go towards. And a lot of times, even project managers, even if you're not directly doing art, but you're working as a project manager or something, mm-hmm. you try to automate these workflows, and that's why I think there's a lot of those workflow management tools are popular now, like Slack and what's the Monday.com. I see an ad for that every 5 seconds and kill myself. So there's that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. I feel more inclined. Like I love creating processes in my job, and I love problem solving. And I feel like it's those same triggers that would lead me to create a project, in a game engine. It's the same thing, just in a different area. And once you know exactly what button to click, you can solve that problem. I like that. Going back to the Shadows Lengthen, I would love to know where you're at this stage. I know we've been in a pandemic, and a lot of things have probably been thrown out of order. But are you looking at releasing soon? Are you still developing? What stage is the project at?
So I'm at 0.54. I expected to be farther along than this, and I told myself, someone has to make a game in the Blender game engine, come hell or high water. And then I guess hell kind of came with the pandemic, at least for America. So it really slowed me down a lot. But I've just been recently I familiarized myself with Steam, the API, and I've it's uploaded now, and so now I actually have it tested. I have to wait for the ratings system to come back. They're gonna rate the game, so I'm waiting on that. But there's a playable loop right now where the game starts. It successfully loads the open world, and there's a win state and a lose state, which is, it took me this long to get here. And it's harder than you might imagine, because the Blender game engine is it's got a couple of problems. And that's not anyone's fault. It's just the way it is. But I will be releasing the game October of this year, 2021, fittingly around Halloween. And it'll be like an open beta, or I guess a playable version of it, and it won't be long. Like, you can run for thousands of miles in any direction, but you can also beat the game in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
that's it, and then you're done. You can go back and experiment. So, like, if the first monster that I'm featuring is the vampire. So it's based on the Romanian term, the vampire rule, and which means the vampire, and it'll be about experimentation. So you could, sunlight kills her, or she can hear you, or she can smell you, and you could play again if you want to, and you can experiment with these things. But you can win it, and you're like, all right, that was short, I'm done, and that's it, really. So it kind of it's like a tabula rasa, almost, the blank canvas here, where you have this open world. It's generated, and you've played it. It was short, you can replay it, or you can maybe try poking around in the game files and changing things around. And I'm hoping it inspires some people to actually get involved. Actually, this week, someone actually did start making a horror game in the Blender game engine called Scared to Death. And I was like, my patrons brought it to my attention, and they're like, "Will you see this?" And I'm so excited by that, because I feel like maybe that person saw what I was doing and said, I can do it too. And that's really, really rewarding to me. That's exactly what I was hoping to do. And I mean, the Blender game engine is now supported too. And I'm going to credit myself with giving that, helping generate that interest. Though it's not just me, it's a community really. But I'm definitely probably one of the few people that has thrown his whole self into keeping the Blender game engine, or the Blender game engine, active.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And
there's lots of others out there too, of course. And I can't mention their names. I know I have time limits, but you know, it's
totally. I need to understand a little bit more about the Blender game engine. So it's a fork of Blender. The original Blender game engine stopped being supported, but the Blender game engine is now supported by Blender itself, or is it a third party kind of thing?
It's a third party. It's called Up for not because it's going up and it's better, but because it's Uchronia project. So Uchronia means alternate history or alternate timeline. So it's, what if we did this, but we went in a different direction? And actually, the Blender game engine has existed much longer before Blender stopped supporting the Blender game engine. So they've been existing in parallel for a long time, and now they continue to exist in parallel. So Uchronia project is just an acronym, which is what if this were the case. So it's the what if you didn't cancel the Blender game engine. And I think it's fair to state that still, even though it's a wonderful tool, it would be considered a lot by many people to be a hobbyist level game engine. But I mean, so was Blender. Blender was considered a hobbyist level, and now it's going to become the industry standard. So I don't think it should be counted out just yet. In other words, the Blender game engine is not dead yet. They like to say that, and everyone says it, but it ain't. I'm still using it.
Totally. No, and you're a testament to that. And I can't wait for October to come around and for your experiment and your all your hard work to be out there for people to play around with it. Because what I love is that you're not just releasing it and then crossing your fingers that it's successful. It's you know, releasing it's only the beginning of the journey of the project, and that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate the positive feedback. I get most of what I get is not so positive. Most people say the fear thing. You're doing the wrong thing. You will not be creatively validated. Things aren't going to work out well for you. Maybe you should do what everyone else is doing. I get that a lot. You know, but I've worked at enough entertainment companies to know I have more access to failed projects, and most creative projects fail. A lot of stuff fails. And people are very afraid of failing, especially in the game dev world. I know that there's a lot of iteration, and a lot of people have a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor. And sometimes people, they're very personal with that stuff, and they hold it in. They don't, you know, oh, it's not ready yet. I'll show you when it's ready. And those people are passionate about that, and so they're protecting. You know, they're kind of protecting their territory. They're glottal. They're defensive. But it's counterintuitively, you should actually put yourself out there and scream that you're doing this, and then go on the train. I mean, when the pandemic's over and you can actually do that, and tell people, hey, I'm working on a game and I'm not crazy. You want to give me some money? Help me out? And like, this approach of basically embarrassing yourself is not entirely a bad approach, because it's how we learn. And also, you'd be surprised how much more effective you could be if you rid yourself of your ego and the fear of failure and just jump. That's also kind of bad career advice, because if you wanted to get into the game world and you wanted to be a game dev, I wouldn't recommend people do what I do. So I'm not exactly a role model, like, because you want a job doing it and you want a company to hire you, and companies are not using the Blender game engine yet. Because there's no justification for that yet, because commercial companies haven't thrown their weight behind it. But that doesn't mean it should be discounted. So anyone listening, Godot, Lumberyard, Unity, Unreal, these are all game engines that you can learn, and you probably should stick with these because they're industry standard right now. And if a Blender game engine does present itself as a much more formidable tool, you can thank the Shadows Lengthen and the community at large for keeping it alive and making such a wonderful tool that you one day will benefit from. And you'll know most of the tricks because all game engines more or less use a similar kind of toolkit, and they all borrow from each other. So, I look forward to the day that maybe it survives and it's got a wider base.
Totally. I find that really inspiring. That was really great advice. I think there's a change happening in the industry at the moment, in gaming specifically. Games like Roblox, who just IPO'd, are getting a lot of attention right now, and they're building a games platform. It's a whole different model. I think gaming's definitely changing and evolving every month. There's and indie projects as well. There's a different indie project that goes viral and becomes very successful, and those are built in completely different engines and completely different situations. Indie developers especially find ways to cut corners, find ways to be creative and overcome
Absolutely.
problems. And I think I think open source software as well has proven to be more popular on the internet, in a world where everything, if you can put everything out on the table, those projects tend to be more trusted and respected and have people really committing their time and attention to. So I admire your journey that you're on, and I'm definitely interested in seeing it, because whatever the outcome is of the project of the Shadows Lengthen, I feel like it's just going to help your perspective on the next phase of gaming, because I think we are going through a shift, and whatever projects you're working on, I think you'll have the right attitude to deal with the kind of internet and the environment that gaming is heading towards.
Well, actually, I spent a long time listening to this show, and it's actually been really relaxing listening to it. Actually, I recommended it to people, including some of the people on my Patreon that actually work at Roblox.
Wow.
And they've been telling me all about it for about 2 years now. And I find it interesting that you're kind of on something. You're on a path too. Like, if we were to take some sort of traveler's, I guess, analogy here, if I were the tradesperson, or the person that's, maybe I'm a minstrel or something like that, you're definitely the philosopher here, interviewing these people that are in this really, I would say hopefully it's still in its larval stage, because if we've reached the final form, but you're exposing yourself to all of us, which, first of all, hats off to you, because that's different. That's difficult.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, I know what that's like. You're putting yourself out there and you're talking to all these people. You scheduled a meeting for this podcast at 8 a.m. and you're on a path, and I find it really impressive how many episodes you have under your belt and how good you are at asking the questions. And I see from this Zoom video, you even have we're on the radio, but you have a script, and that's impressive to me. Like,
oh,
so
thanks, Thomas. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you giving your time, because this is just the beginning of the journey, and I think it's the perfect time to be talking about gaming, because it really is expanding in all directions and in all areas. It's the AAA studios are making more money this way. The indie developers are being successful and being creative this way. The different industries like education and social media, those are all being impacted by gaming mechanics as well. And for me, it's just such an amazing time to be talking about what gaming will become. And I think that there's room for everyone. I think more people are being sucked into the world of gaming, whether it's through mobile phones now and things like that. It's just the beginning, but that was the biggest compliment I've received for the podcast. So I appreciate it, and you've thrown me off now. I've lost track of where I was in the conversation.
You're talking about education for a second. And first of all, it was really amazing. Roblox doesn't even have normal maps. indie game devs would be like, oh my god, really? Like normal maps, the textures, they don't have normal maps yet. They don't support that. And look at them. So yeah, it's all evolving. And you're right. This is the start of things, and education's a big thing. I've spoken to a few teachers and parents, and they all say, oh my god, my kid plays Fortnite 24 hours a day, and I don't know what to do. And like a lot of us adults, or less just people in general, why are we? A lot of people feel very powerless in the game industry, or there's these products that are foisted upon us on our phones and on our computers, and I mean, they're not really your friends. I guess I'm like, if I would say that that's how I see myself, is like I'd rather be people's friends. I don't want to live in a world where like, um, I don't know, in 10 years, I don't know. I have a daughter, and like maybe in 20 years when she grows up, her job training profile comes up on her I don't know, maybe her Magic Leap works by then. So she's got her Magic Leap glasses on, and then her job training profile tells her how to do the thing that she's going to do, and then in the bottom corner it's going to say brought to you by Unreal, and then like take your pills, and then like like it's going to, I don't know, say something horrible, like I don't know, vote for this fascist that's now running the country. Like you shouldn't let a commercial company be in control of your art. And like you use the analogy of putting it's painting like on a painting like art, using these game engines that are commercial. It's not terrible, but it's kind of like painting on the side of a truck, and that truck can drive away at any time it wants. And there's fine print, and these people, artists, are very giving and loving people that want to create, but you should not be putting your trust in these commercial companies. And I know that sounds tinfoil hat too, but also how trustworthy have these commercial companies proven to be so far? I mean, there's a few out there, but it seems like after a while they kind of burn through that goodwill, and then all of a sudden you become the next CD Projekt Red or the next Bethesda, and then it just keeps going like this. So I think it's evolving, and I do hope it's in the larval stage. I hope that in the future, medical, job training, transportation, public health, and entertainment. Like, I think that games need to be accessible and open, or we're in for a really, 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 really rough ride.
Totally. No, the analogy of the truck I really like, and I definitely think you're right. If someone's trying to pursue gaming as a creative art form, it's like having a canvas that's on a subscription model. If you stop paying the subscription, your canvas will disappear, and you won't be able to kind of express yourself in the same way. And you're right, because it's done digitally. I don't think that there should be this risk of you losing the ability to be creative, which is really interesting, because gaming is so technically, you need technology to be able to be creative in that way. Although I'm coming back to your analogy of board games as well, because I think that's a similar mindset. It's like you have these board games on your shelf that you can pick up at any time and have fun and kind of treat as a playground with your friends and have fun with. Wow, yeah, there's definitely some interesting thoughts from this conversation. Definitely. Wow.
So everything we do, games, and what you're doing, you're still working technically in the interactive world. We're all dependent on component parts, and we need software to run and hardware to run. So it's unrealistic to say that everything should be open and you should believe in miracles, because these large commercial companies didn't, and they produced all the hardware that these things run on. But you should try. Shouldn't just give up.
Yeah.
And I saw the removal of an open source game in the most successful open source creative 3D suite. An admission of failure, not really failure, but like almost like I didn't want to see them give up. And I don't think that like what I'm doing is particularly more noteworthy than what anyone else is doing, because it'll always have to run on a computer or a device or something like that. But we shouldn't be so concerned about whether the next platform. I hear a lot of these startups, and I've worked at a couple. I've heard a lot about startups. They're talking about the next platform moment. A lot of these, they're hungry for the next platform moment, where like oh, there'll be a new thing and we can disseminate this new product on there. And then there'll be new artists that will put new things on there. And like, I would say don't work. What I'm doing is I'm not focused on the next platform. Partially, obviously, yes, the constraints of my creative world are no longer supported. Well, now it is supported, so, but the Blender game engine. And our future should not be dictated by the next release of component parts or the next gaming console. Don't entirely chase that, because if you make something that's worthwhile enough that people will want to use or interact with, it will empower them to create their own art, and the space will be made for you. Like, for instance, if the Shadows Lengthen, this game, right now, here's a technical problem I'm having, the frame rate suffers greatly. And it's because it's old and it's using the CPU and there's not a GPU wrapper for the player model and all that kind of stuff. So it might have a slow frame rate, but in a couple of years, there may come out some sort of deep learning thing that can, generate a deep learning interpolation between 15 maximum frames. And then all of a sudden, my game could be like a 4K 60 frame per second game, just like everything else, with this addition. And that's kind of like a weird pie in the sky kind of wish that I kind of wish I had now. That's cool. I just figured that out. But that aside, like, that'd be really fun to have that. But back to what I was talking about, like, don't plot your creativity for the platform. Don't try to say, well, I want to be the first out on the beach so bad that I want to be on the PlayStation 6 and I need to use Unreal, otherwise I won't be creatively validated. You're definitely not going to be creatively validated because you're doing that.
Yeah.
You'll be one out of 1,000 other people doing the exact same thing, and you're feeding into an ecosystem that, well, it might, but I don't think so. I mean, it really depends on what sphere you're getting. There's transportation, there's all this VR stuff, and it could be there's lots of spaces to fill. But I think that a lot of artists are very afraid right now, and it's the market's dictated by fear rather than fearlessness. And being around artists, I've seen artists that they go into garbage dumps and use steel girders and weld them together. So that's not a supported engine or anything like that. And I mean, like, I guess I'm kind of going off on a tangent now, but you get my point.
It's all relevant. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. You're speaking for the artist. You're not speaking for the commercial companies. The commercial consoles seek out the commercial game developers that will bring them the best commercial return. And you're speaking from the perspective of the artist that is passionate about games, passionate about creating a powerful experience, and that's not something to ignore, because a lot of people that end up in the AAA studios start out with that passion, and a lot of them leave because they feel like that passion has disappeared, and they want to.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, I've listened to some episodes of yours, and where there's people that get into the industry and they have this. I've heard like the talk where like they've been part of Studio A, Studio B, Studio C, and then they always get this like letter from management saying, hey, guess what? 60% of you aren't relevant. And like this seems to be a pattern. And listening through your podcast, I was like, wow, man, I agree with a lot of what your personal experience is, and also the state of the industry at large. I see, you could say I'm the voice of the artist, but like this is the thing that could make me stand out. And then I work at a commercial game company. Like I could become part of the same machine that you understand that, like, this is like, and this is actually great career advice. If you want to get into the game world or in the interactive market, do what I'm doing. You'll stand out. You will. I mean, maybe not as much but that's the thing. These are demos and things that stand out, and it's how you would get a job like this. So it could be like it could be perceived that I'm creating just the world's most elaborate artistic boo-boo portfolio piece for myself, rather than trying. And even if you don't actually have the passion or the care, it'll be perceived that way, and therefore you could work in a game company or something like that using Unreal or something like that. So it's a slippery slope. I promise I'm never going to do that. But hold me to it. You know what? Hold me to it.
I mean, this brings up a whole other topic of conversation, and that's talking about artists and artists needing to put food on the table. And This kind of loops back as well to Blender, because in the last month, there's been a lot of talk about NFTs and the future of the blockchain and cryptocurrency. And I'm going to be talking to someone on the show about that and how gaming can influence, how gaming can adopt NFTs and that kind of social token movement that's happening to create better games. And I think that's going to answer some of the questions with how to survive as an artist in a world that is very money orientated, and having your community support you and you supporting your community. And there's a lot of interesting discussions there as well. We unfortunately don't have enough time to get into all of that, but I love that at least we got there, because all these questions that we're asking and all these connections that we're making about the kind of path that a game developer wants to take and where they end up going in 15 years later, like after their career has grown. And that kind of conversation I think is really important to have. I really appreciate that you've listened to a few of the episodes and you're able to help me move the conversation along. That means so much to me, and just makes me even more excited for the next chapter of where this podcast and where the industry is going. So yeah, thank you. That's kind of all the time we have for. But if there was one thing I want to plug for everyone listening, and that's to go check out Thomas Murphy's Patreon page at patreon.com/feral3d. You can support the Shadows Lengthen on a monthly basis and help Thomas produce regular content and put his heart and soul into this, and you can kind of jump along for the journey. If there was anything you wanted to say, Thomas, for the audience listening, is there anything that you want to say? We've covered a lot of really powerful, high-level philosophical advice and things like that. So I think you've said more than enough, but is there any quick sentence that you'd want to leave with the audience?
I guess I'd give more advice. Everyone should use Blender. I'd say that's fair. Blender is going to be a very relevant tool, and it's very important. So that's how I feel. And I mean, that does help me too. So there you go.
Perfect. No, I love it. And what I love about that is we'll be able to see in a year's time, in 5 years' time, who was on the right side of history and who invested in the right products. And I think Blender, being an open source product, is a good bet to make, compared to Unreal and Unity that are commercial businesses. Time will tell who will last longer.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on, and have a good rest of your day.
You too. Have a good day.
See ya.